to be great for morale and street cred for O'Connor. I mean, if I was one of those guys, I'd love to work on one of O'Connor's future movies as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing better, man. That happened to me a couple times on The Following, and then it happened to me on
pouring the wine on
American Reunion, and then it happened to me on Hunger Games. So I just got dragged into stuff, and it feels good because you get double pay. And so one day I was walking around, I was in control of about 30, blocking off 30 floors during the Hunger Games because people were rappelling down and you had to keep people out of the frame. And I got dressed up as one of those stormtroopers and I was running up and downstairs just to make sure all the young kids were in place, and I had to run down, play dead, go back up. But it was I felt cool. It was horribly uncomfortable. But, you know, like you get tossed
mix it up a little bit.
You're part of the crew, you have some fun. And then also the stunt coordinator on this, JJ Perry, we've been doing a lot of Final Fights episodes, and he coordinated the great final fight in Haywire, and he also worked on the Vin Diesel movie that just came out, Bloodshot, that we absolutely love. He was the stunt coordinator on that. He did Second Unit. But this dude, so he went from this movie, right? And then he's working on Fast 9, Gemini Man, Skyscraper, Fate of the Furious, Last Witch Hunter, Expendables 3. He's doing all the big movies. So he was the stunt coordinator on this $25 million film. And now he's doing $300 million movies. So the talent they brought in was sick on this movie. This legit, and it shows.
Yeah, so why isn't this movie bigger than it is? I mean, you've got all these other sports that have their it movie. Like, I guess boxing has Rocky, and boxing has Raging Bull, and, you know, you got Miracle for hockey, or Mighty Ducks for hockey, for that matter. But this was almost 10 years ago, and MMA is huge. Why did they not have an it movie, and why wasn't this movie bigger than it was?
That's a really good question, because MMA was big at the time. When you think about the champions, John Jones was a champion, Anderson Silva, Frankie Edgar, Junior Dos Santos. They had some huge names as champions. So this wasn't back in the day when Tito and Chuck were fighting every other week. This wasn't when Hoist Gracie was submitting, well, no, he didn't fight a sumo. He was submitting Ken Shamrock in UFC 1. This was the heyday. This is Tap Out. This was the major, I don't know, like, time for that sport. But also this movie, like we said, it doesn't have that massive marquee name yet. I don't think people really quite knew who Joel Edgerton was. Hardy was kind of hot off Inception. He was in Bronson, but he wasn't a name. Jennifer Morrison wasn't really that big of a name. None of the fighters that they fought were too big of names. And I think it just, MMA, as much as a bubble that I'm in with it, it still wasn't that big. I mean, I think they were on UFC on Fox 1 by that time. So it wasn't even hitting the mainstream quite yet. So it gets released. It doesn't have all the momentum in the world. It was also released in September. That's not a great time. August, September was always quiet. So it just, you have this movie where there's no clear antagonist. There's no love story. There's no love story in it. There's no...
Well, between the family.
Oh, yeah. I guess between brothers and fathers. But I guess you don't have like a Yo Adrian moment. Well, you do. Yeah, I love you.
Probably because it's equal part drama and equal part action. So it's like the action people aren't quite all happy. The drama people are like, you know, I'm not really into fighting. So it's kind of hard to appease everyone involved. But I thought they did a damn good job.
Oh, it's excellent. I think it's just the time, the names, and I mean, it caught on with an audience. And also, a tough thing about this movie, and one important thing you watch in these films, and they were talking about it in the commentary, and also you learn about this when people make comedy movies, which is this isn't. But this movie starts off with a dialogue scene between Tom Hardy and Nick Nolte. It doesn't start with a bang. It doesn't start with a fight. It doesn't start with gratuitous anything. So normally when you have some movies, you always have the cold open. Bond, F9, Rocky, those matches. You always open into something like hot. But in this one, you have Tom Hardy drunk, asking his dad for a drink. And I do like that when he asked his dad, Nick Nolte, for a drink, Nolte's like, nah, I don't drink. Or I'm done with it. And Tom Hardy goes, this isn't your brand anymore? And that makes a lot of sense because alcoholics find their brand. So Tom Hardy went out, found Nick Nolte's brand, and was just expecting to have a antagonistic drink with his pops. But instead it turns into this argument. Like, it turns into this totally different world. And imagine being in the theater and that. This movie got an A cinema score, 82% Rotten Tomatoes, very high.
Academy Award nomination.
You know, it's best supporting actor, 8.2 on IMDb, Eric. That's sick. Like, not many movies. It's the 160th movie on IMDb's top 250. That's rare. Mm-hmm. So people adored this movie, but it's not mass. It's not a mass audience. And I don't think marketing messed it up. I don't think a lot of things messed it up. I just think people weren't going for that at the time.
Got it.
And it was out of the theaters. Oh, sorry, go for it.
I don't know, speaking of the beginning, have we given an overview of the movie for the people who may not have seen it yet? Do you want to give a quick overview?
Yeah, I mean, it's about two. All right, so what it is Warrior. It's called Warrior, and I'll read this thing. The youngest son of an alcoholic former boxer returns home where he's trained by his father for a competition in a mixed martial arts tournament, a path that puts a fighter on a collision course with his estranged older brother.
Protagonist versus protagonist.
Yeah, I mean,
that's why I love it.
Yeah, we were trying to figure out another movie, and we were talking about Captain America: Civil War, but we couldn't really think about too many other protagonist versus protagonist films. And man, I can't believe this. This is 8.2, and this is 423,000 rankings on IMDb, which is insane. But also too, this movie had no chance for word of mouth because the second week it went from number 3 to 8, and so. When a movie drops to 8 in a busy landscape like this, it's out the theaters in 4 weeks.
Yeah, and I heard that they pushed it back from originally planned because The Fighter with Mark Wahlberg was supposed to be released at the same time, and both the names were kind of generic Warrior, The Fighter. So they figured that they'd have a better chance of standing out if they just waited a little bit. And by that time, people kind of already saw the drama action fighting movie.
Oh, wow. And that's a brilliant Christian Bale in that movie. Is excellent. Well, he's always excellent. And Wahlberg.
Yeah.
What a good movie. Warrior and The Fighter came out. That's sick. Oh, jeez Louise. That's a good year. That's why Nick Nolte lost. He lost to Christian Bale in The Fighter.
Did he really?
I was watching this movie and I went, how did he lose? How did Nick... So Nick... You know, when you think about Nick Nolte nowadays, you think of a grumble, barely audible sounds. But this movie, he's beautiful. It's a beautiful performance. And people are standing up and giving him claps on set. No one ever gives standing ovations. The only times I've ever seen standing ovations on set is when people survive a motorcycle crash or do a great stunt. I've never seen someone in a diner talking and get a round of applause. And that's what he got.
For someone who's been around for so long and has done so many different types of movies, and he's passed on movies that would have been like dream movies for any other A-list actor, for him to get excited about a picture, it's got to have a lot of nuance. It's got to have that whole range, and you could tell he was really into it. He was all in.
Oh, that's so good. And I mean, imagine him working for as long as he did in the business, acting alongside Tom Hardy or Joel Edgerton. Well, he doesn't have any scenes with Joel Edgerton, but he loved working with Tom Hardy. Nick Nolte did. He's like,
did he?
This kid's got talent. You know, he's just thinking to himself that this is a guy who's going places, and he really dug it. And he was always on set. He was always around. He was always there to improvise. I mean, it shows. I mean, the way they have this. And when you think of Nick Nolte, you don't think of emotion. You don't think of him being sensitive. And in this movie, he lets it out. But he lived that life too. Like, he's earned that craggly voice and those and the leathery skin. Like, he's lived. So I think it was good casting on their part too.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess another thing I like getting off of Nick Nolte was I loved Frank Grillo in this movie, who plays the trainer of Brendan Conlon. I mean, Frank Grillo,
yeah.
I didn't know who he was in 2011, and he's since moved on to bigger and better things. But watching him, like, this dude is awesome. Just the way that his movements, the way he talked, the way that he worked Brendan. And he actually took after a guy named Greg Jackson, who's in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He trains John Jones. He's trained Joe Daddy Stevenson, Diego Sanchez, Holly Holm, who was a champion. He's trained champions. And so they went, Edgerton and Grillo went and lived with him for a month. And then they went to Greg Jackson and they stayed there for a few weeks and they showed him all the previs. Oh, another thing about this movie, why they filmed it so quickly, they did a lot of previs and storyboards. So then when they were on set, they could just knock it out. It's a lot.
Yeah, they only filmed, it was 8 weeks, right?
Yeah, that's not much. It's not, and for all the million feet of film, geez Louise, and all the fighting and all that. So they had to previs everything, but they took all the fights. So you and I choreograph a fight scene, and it looks like Broken Arrow, and we take it to Greg Jackson, and he's like, this is an MMA fight. So they worked it to the point where all these fights obviously weren't a traditional MMA fight because that might be kind of boring, and they turned it into something that Jackson supported. And most of the stuff that Frank Grillo said was right out of Greg Jackson's mouth, and Greg Jackson loves Beethoven, and that's so why you hear all the classical music playing in the film. Of course, that's what Greg Jackson does, and so they went to the best, and they got the best performances.
Well, he also coached Grillo how to be a coach. Like, what, if you're like, what am I going to say in this instance where my fighter is just getting his, what handed to him? Like, what do you tell him? Or like, how do you tell him to finish? How do you sound authentic as a coach? Because otherwise you're just shouting random stuff.
Kick him. Fight him.
But, I like Grillo for a couple reasons, because I feel like he almost could have been one of the fighters in the movie. Like, he was felt like he could have been interchangeable with one of them. Like, if Hardy didn't get it, I could almost see Grillo taking that role. And I was thinking about Grillo, and I just noticed this. I've seen the movie like 4 times, 3 recently. I didn't realize how big of a role he played at the end of the movie. Like, after the fight, and how he's like, he points to the wife, Tess, and he's like, meet you in the locker room. And then he goes and he's like, let's get him out of here. And he's like telling people, like, he set the stage for everyone to go out. And that's what I love about it. Those little things where this guy's performance is so good, you give him that little extra supporting role at the biggest point in the movie.
You know what's I was so into the national song that I didn't really notice him in the background. So I'll have to go back and watch that again and check it out. Just also, Jennifer Morrison does a really good job at the end, because there's just a camera pointed on her, and when she's cheering, you see her crying. I know she's an actor, but that must be tough. Like, hey, look like your husband just won the fight of your life. I mean, she sells it. Just the way the atmosphere is, and everyone, like, even normally I hate extras. The extras are really good in that scene when he was walking him out. And I don't know if you noticed this, man. So they meet in a final, and we can talk about the fights leading up to it. But in the final, it's 5-round fights, a 5-round fight. Hardy wins the first 2, actually first 3. Edgerton pops out, breaks Tom Hardy's arm at the end of the 3rd round, and then Brendan takes over in the 4th, and he wins in the 5th. Which GSP's fought with a broken hand. A guy named Connor Hune fought with a broken hand. Several people have brawled with broken foots. So it's not totally implausible that this ending happened.
No.
But the 5th round, I don't know if you noticed, but when the National comes on, that song about today, and they listen to it every day on set, this song. But when it comes in, everything kind of blacks out. Like, the sound just goes to that song. You don't hear Grillo anymore. You don't hear the crowd.
Yeah.
It just becomes between Joel and Tommy and the song. And that's just brilliance in kind of sound editing and movie making.
It's having a melancholy almost feel in the middle of a fight was kind of a risky move. I mean, the music was great in that end fight. I mean, you had the drums, like you had like
the drums
tribal drums. They're working their way up to crescendo. Then you've got the Beethoven theme, and then you got the silence with Tom Hardy, and then you got that melon kind of soft, kind of sad, emotional song at the end. I mean, the music played a big part in the emotional roller coaster.
Yeah, I forgot about the drums too. When the drums come in.
Yeah, I was fired up because you got, at that point, the drums were perfect because my heart was racing. I remember the first time I saw it. I'll never forget it because you have so much built up to the last fight. The fight itself is entertaining, but it's not as good as everything that wraps around it. The storyline with Joel Edgerton's character almost losing his house and his daughter with the health problems. He's an aging fighter. He was suspended from school. He's fighting his brother. And then you've got Hardy, who's AWOL from the military, completely post-traumatic stress syndrome. He wants to give the money to his best friend's widow. Then you've got all these different storylines. You've got the students cheering for him. You've got the cheering for Joel Edgerton. You've got the Marines in the audience cheering for Tom Hardy. There's so much in that fight scene. And with the drums, it's like that combined with the anticipation of, one, you don't know who's going to win, and 2, you don't know who to cheer for. Or you probably have one you're kind of pulling for a little bit. But that's why I think this movie is so magical.
Yeah, and just the way it builds. And then when he starts saying, I'm sorry, I love you, tap, it's okay. You're like, come on. Like I've probably watched this movie 10 times and it gets me every single time. Also, this movie, man, this is an hour and 35 minutes. This is a 2+ hour movie. It doesn't feel like it.
No, not at all.
There's no really meat on the bones of this. It goes through fast.
Yeah, they got to set up 2 people's backstories. They got to have the training montages.
Oh, yeah.
Different training styles. They got to
Yeah.
set all this stuff up, and then they got to get to the fight and have this, satisfy the MMA crowd. And that's the other cool part is, so I'm a very casual MMA